Understandest thou what thou readest in the King James Version? A viewer put me on to today's false friend in the King James, or I would never have noticed it. And I'm going to warn you, it's obscure on multiple levels, and it's at nerd factor 9. It's the word moisture in Psalm 32:4. This word appears precisely twice in the King James, and once it carries just the meaning that we would use. And some fell upon a rock, and as soon as it was sprung up, it withered away because it lacked moisture. Moisture is, in this case, water or other liquid diffused in small quantity through a solid substance. That's sense 1b for the word moisture in the Oxford English Dictionary. And though I'm doing my standard steps a little out of order here, that's what the Greek word in Luke 8:6 means also. It refers to moisture in the soil without which plants cannot live, according to our responsible New Testament Greek lexicon, Bauer, Donker, Arndt, and Gingrich. But there's something interesting and obscure in the BDAG entry that will help us when we get to the other use of the word moisture in the King James. It's kind of gross, I'm sorry, but look. The word could be used of juices secreted by decaying flesh. 1 Clement 25:3. On the medical use of the word, see Hobart 57 and following. There was a medical use of the word. I followed that path a little bit, and I looked in another academically trusted lexicon, one that looks at Greek further beyond the New Testament, called LSJ, Little Scott Jones, and it suggested that the word could be used to refer metaphorically to blood, and also that it could point to the bodily humors. One of the newest academic lexicons, which bears a relationship to LSJ, often called Brildag, mentioned the humors too, and gave an example sentence from the 5th century BC doctor Hippocrates. Hippocrates is the source of today's Hippocratic oath that doctors take. Hippocrates said that the sun also draws out from men the most subtle part of the humor. As you may know, the 4 humors, blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm, were ancient medical concepts that came in fact from Hippocrates. The idea was that when these fluids were out of balance, certain behaviors and feelings and maladies would result. This is one of the reasons that as late as 1801, I think it was, or was it 1800, doctors decided to bleed President George Washington as a means of treating his final illness. Many people have wondered whether it wasn't in fact taking 5 pints of blood from the ailing Washington that is what actually killed him. But this was standard medical practice at the time because, ultimately, of the ancient medical model called the 4 humors. The Greek word translated moisture in Luke 8:6 was also used to name the humors, the fluid elements of the body. So it's very interesting that the King James Version, following the Bishop's and Matthew's Bible before it, uses the word moisture in one other place in a context where a word from the humors fits. For day and night thy hand was heavy upon me. My moisture is turned into the drought of summer. Selah, Psalm 32:4. This gets nerdy and complex. It turns out that the last line of this verse is more than a little obscure. The Hebrew word that the King James translates as moisture is used only twice in the Hebrew Bible. The other time it's used is in Numbers, and it means there cakes. But interpreters are agreed that its other use in Psalm 32:4 just can't mean my cake is turned into the drought of summer. That's meaningless. The ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, called the Septuagint, is no help to us. It reads, I became thoroughly miserable while a thorn was fastened in me. The Latin Vulgate, written 700 years later, says something similar, quite likely, I should think, because of the Septuagint alone. There's no cakes and no moisture in either of these ancient translations. It's hard to know whether the Septuagint or the Vulgate were translating a slightly different text here, or were being dynamic. Yes, they did that back then, like the NIV. So the second half of this verse is, to say the least, difficult, obscure. Today, commentators tend to think that moisture in Psalm 32:4 is probably what is meant here, just like the King James says, but the harder I pushed into what the word in Hebrew means, the less certainty I found, and the more I began to feel like everybody was just holding on to the King James tradition for lack of anything more substantial. Kyle and Dalish do the only thing that really can be done in these circumstances. They look to Arabic for an apparently related word that means moisture. I looked in the Old Testament translation by the Hebrew expert Robert Alter. It's actually behind me on the shelf there. He sticks with the King James tradition too by going for sap. I looked in multiple commentaries, Kidner, Craigie, Wilson, Goldingay, others. Nothing. The Jimmy Swaggart Bible commentary. Nothing. This happens with Hebrew. We just don't have ancient Hebrew from outside the Old Testament to help us to know what some very obscure words mean, words that occur only once or twice. My personal sense is that we simply don't know what the word means, and we just have to do our best to figure out what word would best fit in this slot. Now, moisture works, and it works very well. And if that's what the Hebrew is saying, it's apparently being used as a metaphor for vitality. Again, Alter used sap, life sap. So some translations go with vitality or strength. But let's get back to English. Look again at the Oxford English Dictionary entry for moisture. The very first sense is the liquid part or constituent of a body. Specifically, in medieval philosophy, the moist property naturally inherent in all living plants and animals. If you follow this video, which is just necessarily more difficult than most others I've done, a little bell should have gone off in your head. Ding! Because the Oxford English Dictionary entry sounds an awful lot like what the Greek word translated moisture in the New Testament could mean. And it also, importantly, fits this passage really well. Day and night thy hand was heavy upon me. My moisture, my blood, my life sap, the bodily fluids and humors that give me vitality, is turned into the drought of summer. It's impossible to know with certainty that the King James translators had this first sense, 1a in the OED, in mind when we don't even know what the Hebrew word they were translating means. Perhaps, indeed, the King James translators just meant this other sense, 1b, the moisture content, the water content in our bodies. But on balance, given the predominance in the King James translators' day of the ancient model of the humors, and given how well the humors sense fits this context, I think that's what the King James translators intended. And sure enough, the Oxford English Dictionary marks this sense as obsolete. We don't use the word moisture to refer to the humors anymore, largely because we don't talk about the humors anymore except in history class. That sense of the word moisture just doesn't exist in our English. But it did exist in the King James translators' English, and on balance, again, I think that's what they meant. I've read this phrase my entire life, and it never occurred to me that moisture here in Psalm 32 meant anything other than what we mean by it, the water content in the body. And let me admit something again clearly. I think I still got the overall point of the passage. The metaphor is clear enough, even if I missed the nuance that was intended by the King James translators. This is an awesome psalm, one I've always loved, one that is quoted in the New Testament. It speaks of the blessing of the one whose transgressions are forgiven and whose sin is covered. And the verse that we've been focusing on talks about the chastisement of the Lord that rests on someone who hasn't confessed his sin, who doesn't know that blessedness of the covering of sin. Here's the English Standard Version. For when I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My strength was dried up as by the heat of summer. Selah. It's only when the psalmist David, this is a maskil of David, it's only when he acknowledges his sin and refuses to cover his iniquity that God forgives him. Many are the sorrows of the wicked, but steadfast love surrounds the one who trusts in the Lord. Be glad in the Lord, and rejoice, O righteous, and shout for joy, all you upright in heart. I got all of this, even when I was an exclusive reader of the King James Version, and when I was still a teenager. And even when I missed the tiny nuance that I'm now arguing the King James translators intended in the word moisture, I still got the overall picture, and almost all of it. So why make an entire video about one kind of mild false friend that occurs only once and is disputable? Here's why. It's not only, as I said in my book, that I want to get every piece of meaning the translators place in the Bible when I read my Bible translation. That's true too. It's that I want to teach you what language is like, the ways language changes. I want you to see how random and varied those changes are. Language change is a fog that creeps over a landscape, leaving some bushes in full clear view and others obscured or half obscured or 32.8% obscured. Language change is gradual and nebulous. We aren't likely to wake up one day and discover that, oh, English has taken a great leap forward or backward, not unless there's some kind of major geopolitical catastrophe that alters our linguistic situation considerably. And even then, English is spoken by so many people that catastrophe will affect only the English of the nation who suffered invasion. Invasion by conquerors who speak another language is how language changes rapidly. That's actually what happened to English more than once. So let's hope that it's Canada that invades the US. I don't know about you, but that would be okay with me, eh? One more illustration. Language change is like kids who've lined up 100,000 glass bottles on a long, long fence. And yes, I mean 100,000. Then they start plinking away at the bottles with their BB guns from 30 or 40 yards away. Some bottles get knocked completely off the fence. Those are my dead words, like besom, chambering, and emerald, like beeves, bold, and bewray. Ague, amerce, blains, chapiter, haply, meat yard. Those are lying on the ground behind the fence. They've been completely knocked over. But other bottles have just had their tops plinked off, and from a distance they might look undamaged. These are my false friends, like halt, remove, and commend. People don't notice that they've been damaged, but fill one of them with soda pop and put it to your lips, and you'll get cut by jagged glass. Okay, that metaphor got a little out of hand, a little graphic. That's probably a good place to stop. But now, hopefully, thou understandest what thou readest in the King James Version a little better.